We go. Good evening, everybody. Today is session 2 of 3 sessions that I am doing with ESMS. Thank you so much again for having me, and thank you to everybody who came last week, and thank you to everybody who caught up on YouTube for our first anti-racism session for parents and guardians. Now, I'm just going to do a quick introduction as to who I am. I won't go into it in too much detail because we talked about this last week, but my name's Pula Lawton. I am an educator. I was a teacher for some time before I became a barrister, and I'm also the founder of ARISE, which stands for Anti-Racism in Schools and Education. I am somewhere slightly different today. I am actually in Edinburgh because I was at the school today and I was working with children in P6 and P7. We did some really interesting workshops and assembly, and I hope that they enjoyed them and were able to take something away with them. I also did some training with the teaching assistants and staff. So this is kind of the final part of my day in Edinburgh. I wish I could see you face to face, but alas, we are online. And this is almost like the final of the Trinity. So I've seen the children, the staff, and now the parents. And today's session is something slightly different to what we discussed last week. Last week, we talked about many different things, which we will recap in just a second. But before we do a recap, I just want to kind of give you a heads up of what we are talking about today. And today we are going to be focusing on ideas around diversity. And we're going to talk all about diversity and what that means and what it looks like and why it's important. But we are also going to talk about leading by example. So how you as a parent or a guardian can lead by example, and how your behavior is important in how children kind of interpret the world and interpret things with regards to diversity. We're also going to look at how you can discuss other cultures and celebrate your own culture and celebrate other cultures in a way that's respectful and useful. We are also going to talk about representation, what it looks like, why it's important. And we are going to, amongst all these things, discuss how this is important in raising an anti-racist child. We're then going to have a Q&A session for anybody who does have any questions or anybody who wants to just make a general comment, and then we are going to wrap up. So those are our outcomes and our overviews for today. So mainly focusing on diversity and representation and celebrating other cultures. But before we launch into today's session, I just want to recap last week in case you weren't there or in case you have forgotten what happened last week. But we talked about the importance of discussing racism with your children. Now, as you can see here on the slides, my most important kind of point of last week was talk. Start the conversation, have the conversation. They're really, really important conversations to have. They are uncomfortable conversations to have sometimes, especially if you are not used to discussing such things. If that's the case, you might start to feel a sense of tension, or you might start to feel slightly uncomfortable. And that's good, because it means that you are really thinking and you're really challenging your views and you're growing as a person and as a parent. Sit in that discomfort and grow from it. Okay, so don't kind of shy away and just think to yourself, oh, this is far too difficult. I don't like having this conversation. I don't like the things that it's bringing up for me. Therefore, I'm never going to speak about it ever again, because that's not helpful to anyone. And it's definitely not helpful to the children. And that's what we want. We want the children to be able to kind of grow and learn from you. The other thing that I said last week is that talking about race and racism doesn't have to come, talking about race, I should say, doesn't have to come from a place of negativity. So one thing that I've noticed in many kind of schools that I work in, and just from talking to people in general, is that parents and teachers and staff members will have conversations about race, but it's usually reactive. It's usually off the back of something really terrible happening in the world, and it's kind of the conversation of the day, and it's like, oh, now's the opportunity, and now we really need to start talking about it. It doesn't have to get to that point. You can just kind of have organic conversations every now and then, and it doesn't have to be off the back of something negative that has happened. The other thing that I said last week is that people of colour cannot and shouldn't be expected to fight racism alone. So as a person of colour, I used to have the talk. And when I say the talk, if you are a person of colour, or if you are somebody who has experienced racism, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's that conversation that your parents have with you when they say to you, look, this is how things work. You are going to experience racism. You are going to experience discrimination. And this is how you need to deal with it, or you need to be prepared for it. Okay. It's really unfair for only some children to have that conversation. It's not fair for children of colour alone to be expected to carry that burden. People need to be raising anti-racist children, not just preparing their children for the fact that racism might be an inevitability. Okay, so it's all about having those conversations and raising anti-racist children. And the final kind of general takeaway of last week's session was that if you don't say something, somebody else will. And by that, I mean that if you do not speak to your children about race and racism, they are going to find out from places and people who might not necessarily be telling them the truth. They're going to find out in a way that's not necessarily safe. They might find out in a way that's not necessarily or someone might explain it to them in a way that isn't helpful. So if you do not kind of educate them yourselves, they're going to be filling the gaps in ways that can be slightly problematic. So this was our takeaway for last week. As I've said 1,000,001 times before, it is recorded. So if you want to go back and recap anything, you can, because it is available for you to watch. Today, we're going to be talking about diversity though. Okay, and the reason we're going to be talking about diversity is because it's one of those things that parents and guardians usually ask me about. They say, you know, well, how can I talk to my child about difference, and how can I talk to my child about diversity? So this is what this session is all about. And usually when I kind of go and do training sessions and I ask, you know, what is diversity? People say diversity is difference. And yes, it is. Diversity is all about the idea of people being and looking and behaving in a different way. And usually, I think there's a slight misunderstanding about who is considered to be diverse, or who is the prototype and who is the other. And I said this last week, it's really important that you choose your words carefully. So if you are referring to a minority group, or you are referring to somebody who doesn't look like yourself, they are not the diversity. Okay, so it's not that Black people are the diversity, or that brown people are the diversity, or people from the LGBTQ+ community are the diversity. Diversity is the idea of everyone collectively being different. There is no prototype, there is no norm, there is no one kind of standard. And then if you do not fit into that standard, everybody else is the diversity. It's about difference in general. And this definition is one that I really, really like. It says that diversity is about empowerment. It's about empowering people and respecting and appreciating what makes them different in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, slightly archaic terminology, education, and national origin. Okay, and it's something to be celebrated. Now, it's all of those things. So today I will refer to all of these things. I won't just be focusing solely on racism. Okay, I probably will mention racism more than anything else because we're here within the context of anti-racism. But just remember that diversity is celebrating and appreciating and respecting all of these things. And that's another word that I kind of want to make you aware of, celebrating. So I really do not like the idea of tolerating. I might have said this in last week's session, but I will say it again. Tolerance is something, in my mind, it suggests that something is bothering you and you kind of just put up with it because you have to. So I think we should move away from using the term tolerate, or we need to learn to tolerate other people. We need to learn to celebrate other people. Okay, it's not about tolerating, it's not about something being a nuisance and you just kind of being like, oh, well, that's a thing and we need to put up with it. It's about celebrating it. So again, just be careful with the terminology that you are using around your children. How do you celebrate diversity? Well, you can do it in many, many different ways. You can celebrate your own culture respectfully. You can celebrate other people's cultures respectfully. This is not to say that you should now start, celebrating every single religion and practicing every single different religion. Not in that respect. What I mean is kind of embracing it. Okay, so learning about other cultures, learning about other religions, and embracing it and having those conversations in your home about all of these things. You can celebrate diversity by exposing your children to different ways of life. Okay, and again, by that, I don't just mean, oh, we live in this, we live this certain type of life, and we need to now start, living in a very different type of life so that they understand what that feels like. No, what I mean by that is by letting your children know that there are many, many different ways to live life. And there are many different ways to live life all over the world. People in different countries might not live in the same way that we live in this country. And it's all about making them aware of the fact that people live differently. And that's something to learn about. It's about praising different ways of life. Okay, so one thing that I remember very clearly from being at school, and this is something that I had a conversation with one of the teachers at ESMS today, was the use of language about other countries. So this is quite archaic, but I remember being in school and terms such as third world were always used to talk about countries in Africa, countries in South America, countries in Asia. They were third world countries. And when we had conversations about the movement of people, which by the way was very, very unusual, we never really spoke about that. But when we did speak about things like that, in geography, for example, it was always, oh, well, this group of people moved to this country to get a better life, okay, because life was better. And again, it's putting certain ways of life on different, you're putting one way of life on a pedestal, and you might not deliberately be saying, okay, the way of life in this country is not very good, but inadvertently you said, here it's better, and people move because it's better. But actually, have you explained all the other reasons why people move? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But just praising different ways of life and making sure that you're not kind of putting one way of life on a pedestal and at the same time denigrating another way of life. Reading diverse books. I said this last week, books are your best friend. Get those books in if you can. Go to your library if you can. Find out what kind of books that they have in the school library, which I know are a really, really wide range because I was there this afternoon. Watch diverse films and TV programs. Again, this is something that has changed massively from when I was a child. I don't remember there being that many, there were Black TV presenters. I remember on BBC, this was pre-CBBC. This was when there was just channel 1, 2, 3, and 4, even pre-channel 5. But anyway, there were Black TV presenters, but I don't remember there being that many children's shows that had a lot of diversity. Whereas now, if you turn on CBBC as an example, there are children's shows that have children of all different races, children of all different religions, children who are growing up in foster care. If you take Tracy Beaker, for example, the story of Tracy Beaker, or the Beaker Girls and programs like that, that didn't exist. That wasn't on TV when I was a child. And I think it's really, really good to kind of seek out programs where they, where there is a wide range of people in the TV show or in the movie or whatever it might be. But I will be giving you specific examples, excuse me, of how you can do that and what TV shows and what books that you can read, but we'll do that later on. For now, let's talk about something really, really important. So before we talk about all these really lovely things like books and TV shows and films, it's really, really important to establish one thing. Just because you believe that, for example, your friendship group to be diverse, or you believe that your workplace is diverse, or whatever it is, that doesn't give you a get out of jail free card. So I always say, do not use your proximity or involvement in diversity as a cloak or an excuse. What do I mean by that? I mean, you can have the most diverse friendship group, you can have the most diverse workplace, you could be married to somebody of a different race to you. Okay, you can genuinely be married to somebody of a different race. That doesn't mean that, first of all, you know everything and then some about diversity, because nobody does. And also, it doesn't mean that you can say, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me because I'm married to a Black person. This doesn't apply to me because, you know, my next door neighbor is gay, and so I'm not homophobic, and so I don't need to do any unlearning or relearning or anything like that. Well, no, my child is not like that, because at school they've got friends of all different races and what have you, so I don't really need to listen to this. We don't need to do these things. It doesn't work like that. You do not get to use your proximity to any sort of difference in your life as a cloak. You can have all the books in the world, you can watch all the films, but if you yourself are perpetuating prejudice, your child is going to pick up on it. And that's what I want to talk about now, your own behaviors. So children, there's one thing I've learned about children, working with children for the past however many years, it's that they are incredibly receptive. Even when you think that they are not listening, and they are kind of sat on the floor playing with their Lego, or they're reading a book, and you really think they're very engrossed in their activity, they hear everything. How do I know that? Because time and time again, children have come in. When I was a classroom teacher, children used to come in and they used to repeat verbatim what their parents had said at home. For example, I once had a 6-year-old child say to me, my mummy said that I shouldn't go near you because we don't have the same skin color. Okay, I'm sure that her mum didn't realize that her child was, maybe she did realize her child was in earshot, but I don't think she did. I also don't think that her mum thought that she was listening. I also don't think that her mum thought she would then go to school and repeat this thing. And even racism aside, children come into school and they say wild things. So if you don't want people to know your business, make sure you don't say it in front of your kids, because they do have a tendency to come and repeat what they've heard at home. The reason this is important is because they are picking up on your social cues. Okay, they're picking up on the way that you act, that the way that you behave. So it's really important, before we get into books and films and stuff, you need to have an honest conversation with yourself about what you believe and your own thoughts and your own kind of upbringing as well. Because, and again, this is something that I had a conversation about this just today. Lots of people were raised during a time where it was socially normal to some, okay, to some, not everybody, and it was socially acceptable to some to behave in a certain way, to treat people in a certain way, to never see anybody of a different race, religion, a different anything, okay, different social class. It was really normal to never see people who were different on TV, in books, and so on and so forth. And that can seep into your psyche, okay, even me. So as a Black woman, as I said, I don't remember watching things about too many Black people on children's TV. When I got a little bit older, there were things like, you know, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which was absolutely amazing in terms of what it did and the barriers that it broke. And I remember watching that when I was growing up. But prior to kind of this big boom in the 90s of Black American shows, I really, really do not remember that being a thing. Okay, so the point is, when you haven't grown up around that yourself, you may find it unusual, or you may behave in a certain way because you didn't grow up with that. And we don't want to kind of pass that intergenerational trauma, because that's what it is. We don't want to pass that on to our children and then they pass it on to their children. We want to interrupt that. So you need to have an honest conversation about the way you were raised, the things that you believe to be true, the things that you believe to be false, and the way that you yourself as a parent behave. I read a really, really interesting document that I will try and find and share with you. And it's by a person called Dr. Siggy Cohen. And she's absolutely amazing. She is a child behavioral expert. She's an expert in children's behavior, and she has so many free resources. If you just go into Google and type in Dr. Siggy Cohen, and her work will pop up, and she's got so many free resources on her website about this and other things and other topics to discuss with your kids. She's amazing. But anyway, she wrote this document about 2 years ago, and it was about talking to your children about diversity. And she said something in the document that really kind of struck a chord with me. And it was all about answering these questions honestly. And she and I are on a very similar wavelength in that we both believe that if you cannot answer these questions honestly and you refuse to kind of look inward, it's going to be very difficult for you to embed diversity and celebrate it and do all those wonderful things within your home. So I want you to have a look at the questions on the screen and think really, really deeply about them and answer them honestly. You do not have to answer them out loud. We're not putting anyone on the spot here, but at least have a conversation with yourself. How do you feel about diversity, honestly? How do you behave? Okay, so when you go into a part of town that isn't where you live, how do you behave? And I mean, when you go into a part of town that's a little bit more diverse, when you go back into a part of town that has a different socioeconomic kind of makeup to where you live, how do you behave? What are your thoughts? Conscious thoughts. What comes to the front of your mind? What comes up when I say diversity? Subconsciously, think about it. When I say diversity, when I say if I even just say a couple of buzzwords, race, what pops up? Gender, what pops up? LGBTQ, what pops up? Class, what are the first things that pop into your mind? Think about that. When you hear a language that isn't your own, that isn't your mother tongue, how does that make you feel? I know some people feel really uncomfortable. Okay, I'll give you another example. I remember a time years ago, this is maybe in 2013, and the class that I was teaching, year 3 at the time, I was in a year 3 class, I think it was, and this particular class, we were going on a school trip and we were walking from our school to the local train station to go to this museum, and we had some parent chaperones with us. And 2 of the girls in my class were speaking Polish to each other. And we were just walking down the road, walking to the train station. And one parent he looked really, really uncomfortable. And when we got on the train, I asked him, I said, is everything okay? And he said, actually, no, it's not. Those girls are speaking Polish. This is an English school and this is England and they need to speak English. Okay, and he was just so upset by just hearing 2 7-year-olds speaking another language. If that is you, if you feel uncomfortable when someone is speaking a different language, you need to have a serious conversation with yourself. Okay, I then told him that it's absolutely fine, and actually I think it's really interesting when people speak other languages, and it's a talent that I wish I had. I don't speak another language fluently, and I wish I did. Back to our list, however. How do you speak to people from other cultures and races? This is another telltale sign. So as I said, you can say everything that you want. You could say, my best friend is Black, my neighbor is gay, whatever, you can say all of that. But if the way that you speak to people who are not within your immediate kind of friendship group, or maybe they are different to you in some way, or you are different to them in some way, if the way that you speak changes, then you've got someone learning to do. Because again, these are the things that children pick up on, the way that you speak to them. Okay, how do you speak about different cultures and different races and different communities at home? I said this last week, the conversations that you have within your own community are really important and very telling. So what you're saying at home is very, very telling of how you behave. And like I said, children will come to school and they'll say, my mum said this, my dad said this, my aunt said this, my uncle said this. And this is not your cue to kind of now censor yourself. I'm not saying go and censor yourself, take the children out of the room and just say it when they're not there. I am saying go and do some unlearning, because there's a problem there. Okay, when you do speak about other cultures and other races, for example, does your body language change? Do you freeze up? Do you feel uncomfortable? Is there a certain way that is there a look on your face? Does your tone change? So these are all things that you need to ask yourselves, honestly, before you can have a serious conversation with your children about diversity. Moving on slightly, however, to representation. So when I say representation, I mean exactly what I said a moment ago about seeing people on TV and seeing people in books and seeing people on billboards and things like that. That's really important. It's very, very important for self-esteem. When you never see anybody who looks like you, you will start to believe that firstly, you are not worthy to be in a certain position. So just as an example, if you never see anybody who looks like you on TV, the message there is that people who look like you are not worthy to be on TV, and that's too bad. Okay, and that's not a good message to send to any child. Okay, we want everybody to believe that they can do something. It doesn't have to be TV, it can be a book. If children never see themselves in books, the message that you are delivering is you are not good enough and you're not valued enough and your story doesn't matter, and that's why you're not in the book. Okay, they might not think it. Okay, a child may not come to that conclusion by themselves, but again, it's the message that will seep into their psyche. How do I know? Because it's the message that was delivered to me. Okay, this is a lived experience. I remember very clearly never seeing anyone on TV for a really, really long time who had the same hair as me. And with the teachers earlier on, we talked about this. We talked about the importance of respecting people with different hair textures to you. And I went into the history of Afro hair slightly. I'm not going to go into it too much because we'll be here all evening otherwise. But I don't remember ever seeing anybody on TV who had the identical hair to me. And I don't just mean Afro hair in general and just having an Afro out. I did see that. Okay, I used to see people like the Jackson 5 on TV. I remember when Diana Ross used to have a really big Afro, and things like that. What I mean is I never saw anybody with braids. And I remember the first time that I remember seeing somebody with braids like me on TV, and it was just one of the most exciting things in the world because nobody else had hair like that. And that can be very isolating as a feeling to never see anybody who looks like you on TV. And when I saw this person with braided hair, I remember going to school the next day and telling all my friends. I was like, you've got to watch this film. There's somebody in it. She's got braids. It's really cool. And all my friends, black and white, went and, borrowed the VHS or whatever and went and looked into this film. And it was a really exciting thing. But it was really good for my confidence to see somebody who had hair like mine. And again, hair is another really interesting issue, and it's an important issue. And I come across children all the time, particularly little Black girls and little mixed race girls who don't see themselves as beautiful because a lot of the time the message is beauty equals long flowing hair. Okay, it has to go downwards. It preferably should be blonde because that is the beauty standard. Long, blonde, not braided, not textured in any way. That's the beauty standard. And I come across loads of girls, really young as well, really, really young girls who don't consider themselves to be beautiful because they've never seen themselves represented, or their hair is not kind of celebrated as being beautiful. So that's why representation matters. I'm not quite sure who said this, but the quote, and I'm not a huge quote fan, I find them quite cheesy, but the quote, "You cannot be what you cannot see," is really, really important. And this is with regards to even jobs and dreams. If you never see anybody who looks like you in a certain position in life, why would a child believe, oh yeah, I can become a doctor, or I can become an actor or an actress or a TV presenter, or whatever? Why would they believe that that's the case if they've never seen it in real life? Children are so, as I said, they're very receptive and they want to be able to see it. And once they can see it and kind of contextualize it, that's when they can really start dreaming. I watched a documentary, I cannot remember the name, but it was a couple of years ago. I watched a documentary about an American basketball player. When I find out the name, I'll try and put it in the chat. and he was from New York, and he made it really big, and he was in the NBA, and he did these amazing things. And after years and years, when he retired, he went back to the neighborhood that he grew up in, and he was talking to lots of the children in this neighborhood. And this is a really, really poor neighborhood. The children didn't really have much. There's high levels of crime, lots of social deprivation. And anyway, he went back to this neighborhood, and he went to get his hair cut. And in the barbershop was a little black boy about 10 years old. And just by coincidence, they had the same name. So this basketball player and this little 10-year-old boy had the same name. And this boy was like, oh my gosh, we've got the same name. You could see in his face, he was so excited. And then they spoke to the little boy about his dreams. And they said, what do you want to be? And he said, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll be a basketball player like you. And they said to him, you could become the president. And I think this was pre-Barack Obama. And this boy just kind of looked at him with this stunned look on his face. And you could tell that nobody had ever told him that before. And he'd never seen it before. And I remember he said, I didn't know that. And I thought to myself, that's so sad. A 10-year-old boy genuinely didn't think that he could become the president. Okay, this is not to say all your kids are, I'm sorry to disappoint, not say all your kids are going to go away and become, prime minister or whatever it is, but at least give them the opportunity to believe that and conceive that as an idea. Introduce diverse books. Okay, introduce diverse books into your library at home and question stereotypes. There are some books out there, very, very good books, what we would deem to be classics. I'm not going to name any names, but very popular books, what are deemed to be classics, but they have some stereotypes in them. And I'm not saying get rid of those books and never read them again, because a lot of the time they do have really good stories. The stories are great, and you wouldn't want to deprive a child of a good story, I don't think. So what I would say is, if you're going to have those books in your home, have that conversation with your child and say, oh, actually, that book was written at a time where that language was normal or considered to be normal by some, or that language was commonplace. Okay, so, but introduce diverse books, okay, and the books that you do have, question things that are uncomfortable. Be picky with literature and media, that's what I mean. Okay, so think about what your child can read. Think about what they are viewing, think about what they are watching on TV. I find it so, again, I'm just in awe of how far we've come in many parts of the world in terms of what is on TV. I recently saw a TV program where they were talking to children about affirmations and mental health. And again, I can't think of a single TV program that was aimed at children where positive mental health and daily affirmations and confidence was encouraged. And I think it's really wonderful that we have that. So take advantage of it. Go on YouTube and go and find these things. Make sure children see themselves in books. Okay, so especially picture books. Make sure they literally see themselves. There's so many books out there with diversity in the illustrations. And I think, again, it's wonderful. Go and seek out those books. Introduce positive role models. Okay, so there are lots of ways that you can introduce different jobs and different role models and different positions in life. There's a way that you can do that to children in a way that's child friendly and in a way that's quite organic. Again, use books, do research, look into things together, do it as a project together. Let's try and find out who the first, Black person in space was. Let's go and try and find out who this, just things like that. Okay, all of this is really, really important for children. If you are not too keen on doing that yourself, or you are completely just lacking in time, I would say try and make some time, really try and make some time for this. Another thing that you can do is have conversations with the teachers at school. I know for a fact that the teachers at ESMS are so keen to really get all of this stuff into the curriculum and make sure that the school is a place that is, almost a beacon for positive representation. And you can work collaboratively with the school. If you've got an idea, if you do a job, for example, and you want to go and talk about your job, I'm sure that the school would be happy to hear from the wider community. If you feel that you yourself have something to contribute, then go ahead and do it. Okay, but that is how we kind of really get representation in there. But how do we start a conversation about diversity? I've given you all these different tools, but I want you to have the confidence to actually talk about diversity with your children. And you can start in a way that's really easy. You can talk about your own family history, because I guarantee that even within your own family, maybe immediate family, extended family, there is diversity. There are going to be people in your family who've come from different places and traveled to different places, and, you know, maybe married to somebody of a different religion, maybe a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and talk about that. Because again, they can conceptualize that. They can say, ah, okay, so Auntie so-and-so uses a wheelchair, for example. Okay, it's really, really key that you have these discussions. That's how children know, and that's how children learn. Talk about your family history. If you don't know about it, you could maybe even make that a project. You can sit down with your child and say, well, I don't really know about my family history, but we can try and find out. Okay, we can try and do some research. We can try and ask some questions. It doesn't even have to be your own family. It can be a celebrity if you are so inclined. If your child is a bit like me, I was a super kind of very nerdy child who wanted to know everything about everyone. And I was one of those children who liked to read about, you know, I was an Egypt kid. I was an ancient Egypt kid. I think you know what I mean by that. There were some children who are just obsessed with certain parts of history. I was an ancient Egypt kid, and anything to do with different countries, different cultures, different civilizations, I was on it. And if that's your child, encourage that. Okay, I would 100% encourage that nerdiness. And I say that in a really endearing way. It's not an insult. The geeks shall inherit the earth, I always say. Encourage that 100% and let them kind of do their research and read books and all of that stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be your own family. It can be a famous person in history. It can be somebody who they're learning about at school, but just start really gently and just talk about the fact that within your own family, there's going to be diversity. Okay. One game that I used to play when I was in class was I am and I am. And this was a game where one person would begin and they would say, I am, and the statement about themselves would be something about their identity. So it might be about the way they look, it might be about their personality, it might be about their history, their heritage, their ethnicity, whatever they're comfortable with. And then the second half was something about their likes. So my favorite from my class was one girl. She absolutely loved and adored musical theatre. And when it was her turn, she said, I am half Indian and half Irish, and I'm obsessed with musical theatre. And then the next person has a go and they say, I am whatever, I am 7 and I love Ninjago. And then it's the next person's turn. I am the best at Minecraft, somebody said, and I love my family in Bulgaria. So again, it's just normalizing these conversations and getting them to just see or acknowledge a part of their heritage or their identity, and see how all the answers in the room are probably going to be really different. And you don't need to play this with a big group of, you know, 30 children. You can just do it back and forth between you and your child. I am this and I am that. Your turn. I am this and I am that. And then they pass it back and you talk about all these parts of their identity that are important. I'm going to send you some book lists, and I'm going to send you some activities that you can do very easily at home. Another way that you can celebrate diversity is by celebrating different cultures. Okay, celebrating cultures, your own and other people's cultures. And one way that you can do that is fostering a sense of pride in your child's racial identity. And this comes with an asterisk. And the caveat is, I am not advocating by any stretch of the imagination, I'm not advocating that you start talking to your child about the superiority of one race, okay? All it is, and all I mean by this, is just allowing a child to accept who they are, whether that be racial identity, whether that be their ethnicity, whether that be whatever it is, in a way that is respectful. So it's not about superiority and saying, yes, I am this race and it's the best race and I'm super proud of it and everyone else is inferior. No, it's just about acceptance. Okay, so it's self-acceptance and allowing them to be confident in themselves and allowing them to be confident in every single aspect of themselves. Because again, I come across children all the time and they are lacking in confidence. They are lacking in confidence. They're not confident about their skin color because maybe they've been made to feel bad about it. They're not confident in the texture of their hair because again, maybe they've been made to feel bad about it. Okay, race aside, they are not confident of who they are socioeconomically. There's shame. Okay, there's shame there. They don't want people to know where they live. They don't know, and that's okay. You don't have to share every part of who you are, but it's about not feeling bad about yourself. And you can do that in so many different ways. You can introduce stories of your own culture and your own heritage. Like I said, research your history, look into things like that. Okay, you can introduce stories of different cultures and different heritages and backgrounds. Like I said, collaborate with teachers. Anybody who feels that they've got an interesting life story, something interesting, it might even be an artifact, a family artifact, it might be a family member. What do I mean by that? I mean, a couple of years ago, I remember one of the teachers in our school, she invited her grandfather to come in and talk to their children about being an evacuee. And it was just the most incredible thing. It was so interesting. How often does that get to happen? Okay, so again, it's not about saying, you know, you don't have an interesting family history. You probably do. And if there's a way that you can utilize the resources at your disposal, then please, please, please do it. Schools love that. If you want to come in and tell a story, if you want to come in and do, I don't know, cookery class or whatever it is, I'm sure there's somebody that you could reach out to and you can have a conversation with about making that happen. But it's about celebrating other people's cultures, okay? Celebrating other people's cultures, celebrating your own culture in a way that doesn't say my culture is the best, my culture is superior, everyone else is inferior. That is not what we mean here. As I said, there are so many books that celebrate diversity, and here are just a few. One of my favorite books that's been published within recent times is a book called Hats of Faith, and it's by a lady called Medea Cohen. And it's a tiny little board book. It's not very big, and it's aimed at younger children, but actually I think it's a really good book for everyone to have. It's not very long, tiny little board book. And on every single page, it has somebody from a different religion or a different belief or a different faith, and it explains their hat. It explains their religious headwear, if it's a religion, for example. So on one page, it will have a picture of a lady wearing a hijab. It tells you phonetically how to pronounce it, and it shows this lady wearing a hijab and where she might wear it. On the next page, it might have a picture of a Jewish man wearing a kippah, tells you how to pronounce it. And it's just such a good book, especially if you live in a place where there aren't that many people of different religions and your children won't come into contact with them every day. This is a really, really good way of introducing that idea to your children. There's also a TV show on CBeebies, for those of you who have younger kids, and it's called What's on My Head, and it's a very similar concept, but it doesn't focus specifically on faith. It looks at different jobs. So for example, it looks at a barrister, and this barrister says, oh, this is my wig and I wear it because this is my job. And, you know, and she's a mixed race barrister. She's absolutely fantastic. A lady called Alex Wilson, who's absolutely great. And just things like that, just introducing different jobs and seeing people of, you know, who are underrepresented in different areas and different careers on TV is a really, really powerful thing. All Are Welcome. It's another picture book by Alexandra Penfold and Susan Kaufman. And again, it's all about being accepting and celebrating. The Culture of Clothes by Maya Hanish, is really, really good. It only came out, I think, last year, and it basically looks at clothes from all over the world and has stunning illustrations, and it explains what the clothes are, and it's almost like an annotated diagram of what a person from a certain country might wear, and it explains what it's called and how you pronounce it and when they might wear it. And it's just one of the most stunning books I've ever seen. I'm a huge, huge fan. I Am Not a Label is a great book, and it's by Kerry Burnell, and I think I mentioned it last week. And it's about people with different disabilities, and on each page it describes what their disability is and how, on what they've done in life. Okay, so it has people like Stevie Wonder, and it talks about him, the fact that he was born blind and things like that. Okay, it has Lady Gaga, and I think it talks about the fact that I think she's neurodiverse, if I'm not mistaken. And it looks at things like that. So it's not just physical disabilities, it's things like neurodivergence. And again, these are really important things that children should be learning about, because that's society, and we shouldn't be shielding certain parts of society from our children. The last one on this little list is Lunch at 10 Pomegranate Street, and it's by the chef Ottolenghi and the chef Nigella Lawson. And it's a really, really great book in terms of, first of all, looking at community. So it's about people who live at this place, 10 Pomegranate Street. And in every single kind of flat in this apartment block, there are people from all over the world. And in each flat, they cook something. So it's a recipe book, and it explains, like, this is how you cook it. And this is when you might eat such a meal. And it's just so nice. I think food is such a nice way of, looking at and appreciating and celebrating diversity. How are we doing for time? We are fine. Good. This book list, I'll just leave it on because I can see somebody typing. This booklet, this book list is an abridged version. And again, I will send you the book list if you missed it last week. I will send it again, and it's got so many different books. And some of them are really explicit. Some of them say, this is how you talk about diversity, and this is what diversity might look like. And some of them are really just quite organic and quite, good at embedding diversity into the book. So the book won't necessarily be about diversity in and of itself, but it will have diverse illustrations, and it will have pictures of children from all different walks of life, and they will, that kind of thing. And it's really, really important. And again, when I say diversity, I'm not just talking about racial diversity. I know I'm here within the capacity of ARISE, but it's really important that children understand that diversity does not just mean people who have a different skin color to you. It means everything. It means celebrating LGBTQ+ communities. It means celebrating people with a different or a non-traditional, if you want to call it that, family setting. Okay, so again, another thing that I have no recollection of being in existence when I was younger were books that had parents who were same sex. I don't remember that being a thing, but now there are so many books out there, and I think it's so, so good. It's good that children see that. And I would say, you might be thinking, oh, well, I don't want my child to know that. But the question is, why? Why wouldn't you want your child to know that? I don't think we should shield our children from certain aspects of society and under the guise of they're not old enough. Well, society doesn't discriminate. Society exists, and you've got to learn to kind of exist within society, rather than it being like, oh, I'm going to wrap my children in cotton wool and hope that they never encounter people from this community or that community, because that's not how it works. And again, that comes with a caveat, and the caveat is, I'm not saying go out there and introduce your children to every single thing that exists in the world. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination, but I am saying, if it comes up and if you want to talk about it, then you should talk about it. And that's how we kind of raise children to be global citizens. knowledge is so, so powerful in this respect. It increases understanding. So a lot of these activities that I've suggested, talking to your children, doing a research project, playing these games, talking about your family history, is all about increasing understanding and reducing fear. So some people are fearful because they genuinely just don't know. It's fear of the unknown. Some people are fearful because messages and societal cues that they've picked up, parental cues that they've picked up, they might be thinking, oh, that's a scary thing because I've been led to believe that it's a scary thing when actually it isn't. Regardless, knowledge is so powerful, and you want to impart that knowledge upon your children and give them the tools to think critically as well. So it's not just about talking at them and just saying this and this and this and this and this and, you know, go away with that. Give them the knowledge and the tools to think, okay, to think about what it is that they believe about the world, and to think about how different communities live and how different communities work. Because I might be wrong, but I am going to take a wild stab in the dark here and assume that you want your children to grow up to be children who can survive outside of ESMS and outside of Edinburgh, because it's a bubble. Your local community and your school will be a bubble. And we want them to be able to go out into the world and work with everybody and get on with everybody and just, you know, and be curious. That's one of the most amazing things you can do. Go and travel, go and see the world, want to see the world, rather than just, this is my way of life, don't want any interruptions, and I'm not going to make any effort whatsoever to go and see what else is out there. So that's what I mean when I say knowledge increases understanding and reduces fear. We are going to wrap up. And I know today's session has been slightly shorter than last week, but that's because I've literally just said everything that I want to say about diversity and representation. As I said, I am going to get you those resources. Please, please check out Dr. Siggy Cohen. She's just unbelievably good, and I'm really inspired by her. And like I said, she talks about a range of issues, so not just diversity. She talks about talking to your children about well-being and making sure that your children are happy and safeguarding and all of these really important things. So do have a look at her website. To conclude this session, diversity matters. It's so important. Make sure that your children are exposed to different cultures and different ways of life. It's really, really important. Diversity without meaning. So saying, oh, you know, we've got all of these books and we've watched all of these films and well done us. But without that sense of belonging and genuine kind of celebration of other cultures and other people is a form of tokenism. And that is just what it says. So it's a tick box. Oh, we've got this book. We don't need to do any more work. We don't need to do anything else. And that's the end of that. And that's not what you want. Okay, you want a real sense of belonging. You want people to feel as though they belong. Talk about what makes you you. Talk about what makes your family special. Every single family is special. Every single family is special. Talk about your history, your culture, your journey, the journey of others. Those things are so important. Do it collaboratively with your children. It's a nice bonding exercise. It's a nice thing to be able to do if you have the time. Okay, go and get those books. I will be sending them a more kind of extensive book list of all the things that you can talk about. Please, please, please do some research. Okay, make sure that your child sees themselves in certain positions. Make sure that you are doing affirmations. Okay, it doesn't need to be really obvious. And I'm not saying, you know, every day stand with your child and say these daily affirmations. You can actually, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know, but I'm sure that affirmations are really good and they work in many ways, but it doesn't have to be that kind of obvious. It can just be complimenting certain parts of your child that they feel insecure about. Okay, so just making sure that they know, actually, you know, you're beautiful, and actually your skin's really beautiful, and your hair's really beautiful, and actually this is really great about you, and this is really great about you as well. So just really building that confidence, because again, if there's one thing that I can say from personal experience, is it's the fact that I'm really glad that my parents instilled a strong sense of self in me. Otherwise, I think I'd be a very, very different person. I think I'd be a very different person. I have never, ever felt as though my skin color is something that I should change, that I need to change, despite all these messages and despite being told, you know, you are a dark-skinned Black woman, okay? And this is me being really candid. On the totem pole of desirability, dark skin and Black, okay, is not at the top, okay? That's not the beauty standard that we've been conditioned to. So when you live in a world where that isn't, you are not the beauty standard, and you're being told that you're not, you know, good enough, slim enough, your hair's not straight enough, your skin's not light enough, it's really easy to believe that. So the reason I'm telling you to kind of big your children up is so that they develop that strong sense of self and they don't start to kind of shrink into themselves and lose their self-esteem, because we don't want that to happen. But celebrate them. If you need to do actual daily affirmations, please do. If you don't want to do that, there are videos on YouTube. I recently found out that, and I actually listened to it, it was really nice. Somebody told me that Snoop Dogg was doing a children's show where he wasn't physically in it, but he made a rap about and it was daily affirmations. And I was like, no way Snoop is doing that. And I checked it out, and it's actually the most wholesome and nice thing to listen to somebody saying to you every single day, you know, you're beautiful and you're great and you're this and you're that. And I thought, who would have thought, if you'd have told me that 30 years ago that Snoop would be making kind of daily affirmation videos for children and encouraging their self-esteem, I would have told you that you were lying. But there we go. Thank you again so much for coming, and thank you for supporting this, and thank you for watching if you're not watching live. I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody. Thank you to everybody who took care of me today. I am on all of the things. This is my website, theariseproject.org.uk. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm not going to stop recording just in case anybody does have any questions. So if you do have any questions, now is your chance to unmute yourself and let me know and ask away. If you do not have any questions, then I will stop recording and we'll say goodbye. Any questions? And again, last week still stands. Please email me. It's info@theariseproject.org.uk. If you don't want to kind of ask your question publicly, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to assume that nobody has any questions, and that is fine. Just so that you know, it's Siggy, oh, not Biggie, Siggy Cohen. And I will find out the name of that documentary that I referred to, because it was really powerful, about the little boy who didn't realize that actually somebody who looked like him could be the president of the United States. I'm going to stop recording now.